Welcome to another session of Pilgrims' Progress, a book that was written in the 1600s by John Bunyan. I believe that Pilgrims' Progress is probably one of the greatest sermons that was ever preached. He spent 12 years at one time in prison for preaching the gospel, and another 6 months another time. There have been 1,300 editions of Pilgrims' Progress. I read this book to my children and admonished them with it. And now I'm going to take time to read this to you. And thank you all over the world, from New York, Australia, Pennsylvania, Alabama, Oklahoma, every place that have written emails thanking me for reading this book. We're on page 120. Pilgrim and faithful are on their way. And now we have another one. Faithful has already been killed and martyred for his belief. Now we have hopeful and Demas and Christian as they speak. Hopeful said, I will warrant you when by ends comes up, if he has the same invitation as we, he will turn to sea. No doubt, therefore, his principles lead him that way, and 100 to 1 he dies there. Then Demas called again, saying, but you will come over and see. Christian roundly answered Demas, you are an enemy to the right ways of the Lord in this way, and have already condemned your own by turning aside by one of the Majesty's judges. And why do you seek to bring us into the like condemnation? Now, we read this little area here in the last part of the message. So now we're going to go on, and we see that they never see any of these brethren ever again. And Christian says, as he's leaving these people and going on his way, by ends and silver Demas both agree. One calls, the other runs, that they may be a sharer in his lucre. So these two take up his world and no further go. Now I saw that just one other side of the plain the pilgrims came to a place where stood an old monument, close by the highway side, at the sight of which they were both concerned because of the strangeness of the form thereof. For it seemed to them if it had been a woman transformed into a shape of a pillar. Therefore they stood looking and looking upon it, but could not for a time tell they should have made anything out of it. At last Hopeful saw something written above the head, a writing in an unusual hand, but he, being no scholar, called to Christian, for he was learned, to see if he could pick out the meaning. So he came, after a little laying of letters together, he found the same to be, this remember Lot's wife. So he read it to his fellow, and after they were both concluded that this was the pillar of salt into which Lot's wife was turned for looking back with a covetous heart, when she was going from Sodom for safety, which sudden and amazing sight gave them occasion of discourse. Christian said, oh, my brother, this is a seasonable sight. It came opportunely to us after the invitation which Demas gave to us over to the view of the hill of lucre. He had gone over as he desired, and as you have inclining to do, my brother. We had, for aught I know, been made ourselves like the woman, a spectacle of those who shall come and behold. Hopeful said, I am sorry that I was so foolish and am made to wonder that I am not now as Lot's wife. For where is the difference between her sin and mine? She only looked back. I had a desire to go and see. Let grace be adored, and let me be ashamed that ever such a thing should be in my heart again. Christian goes on and says, let us take notice of what we see here for our hope for our time to come. This woman escaped one judgment, for she fell not by the destruction of Sodom. Yet she was destroyed by another, as we see she turned into a pillar of salt. Hopeful says, true, and she may be to us both caution and example. Caution that we should shun her sin, or a sign of what judgment will overtake such as we shall be prevented by this caution. So Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, with 250 men that perished in their sin, also become a sign or example to others beware. But above all, I muse at one thing, to wit, how Demas and his fellows can stand so confidently yonder to look for their treasure, which this woman, but for looking behind her, for we read not what she stepped 1 foot out of the way, was turned into a pillar of salt. Especially since the judgments which overtook her did make her an example within sight of where they are, for they cannot choose but to see her, did they but lift up their eyes. Christian continues to say, it is a thing to be wondered at. It argues that their heart is grown desperate in this case. I cannot tell who to compare them to so fitly as them to that pickpockets in the presence of the judge, or that will cut purses under the gallows. It is said of men of Sodom that they were sinners exceedingly, because they were sinners before the Lord. That is, in his eyesight. And notwithstanding the kindness that he showed them, for the land of Sodom was now like the Garden of Eden before. This therefore provoked him to jealousy, and made their plague as hot as the fires of the Lord out of heaven could make it. And it is most rationally to be concluded that even such as these, that shall sin in the sight, yes, and that too in despite of such examples that are set continually before them, to caution them to the contrary, and must be takers of the severest judgment to come. Hopeful then says, doubtless you have said the truth, but what a mercy it is that neither you, but especially I, am not made myself this example, this ministereth occasion to us to thank God, to fear before him, and always to remember Lot's wife. I saw then that they went on in their way to the pleasant river, which David the king called the river of God, but John the river of water of life. Now their way lay just upon the bank of the river. Here, therefore, Christian and his companion walked with great delight. They drank also the water of the river, which was pleasant and enlivening to their weary spirits. Besides, on the banks of the river, on either side was green trees that bore all manner of fruit, and the leaves of the trees were good for medicine. With the fruit of these trees they were also much delighted, and the leaves they ate to prevent servants and other diseases that are incident to those that heat their blood with travels. On either side of the river was also a meadow, curiously beautified with lilies. It was green all the year long. In this meadow they lay down and slept, for here they might lie down safely. When they awoke, they gathered again the fruit of the trees, and drank again the water of the river, and then lay down again to sleep. Thus they did several days and nights. Then they sang, behold, you, how these crystal streams do glide, to comfort pilgrims by the highway side. The meadows green besides their fragrant smell yield dainties for them, and he that can tell what pleasant fruit, yes, leaves, and these trees do yield, will soon sell all that he may buy to buy this field. So when they had decided to go on, though they were not as yet on their journey's end, they ate and drank and departed. Now I beheld in my dream that they had not journeyed very far, but the river and the way for a time parted. At which they were not a little sorry, yet they dared not go out of the way. Now the way from the river was rough, and their feet tender by reason of their travels. So the soul of the pilgrims was much discouraged because of the way. For still as they went on, they wished for a better way. Now a little before them, there was on the left hand the road a meadow, and a stile to go over to it, into it, and the meadow is called Bypath Meadow. Then said Christian to his fellow, if this meadow lies along by our wayside, let go over into it. Then he went to the side to see. And behold, a pathway along the way on the other side of the fence. This, according to my wish, said Christian, here is the easiest going. Come, good Hopeful, and let us go over. Hopeful said, but how if this path should lead us out of the way? Christian said, oh, it's not likely to do that. Look, does it not go along by the wayside? So Hopeful, being persuaded by his fellow, went after him over the stile. When they were gone over, they got into the path, and they found it very easy for their feet, and also they were looking before them. They looked and saw a man walking as they did, and his name was Vain Confidence. His name was Vain Confidence. So they called him after them and asked him where the way led. He said, to the celestial gate. Look, said Christian, did I not tell you? By this you may see that we are right. So they followed and went, and he went before them, and behold, the night came on. It grew very dark, so that they were behind and lost sight of him that went before. Here, therefore, they went before, Vain Confidence by name, not seeing the way before him, fell into a deep pit, which was on purpose there made by the prince of those grounds to catch vainglorious fools within, and was dashed to pieces with his fall. Now Christian and his fellow heard him all fall. So they called to know the matter, but there was none to answer, only they heard a groaning. Then said Hopeful, where are we now? Where are we now? Then was his fellow silent, as mistrusting that he had led him out of the way. And now it began to rain and thunder and lightning in very dreadful manner, and water arose all around them. Then Hopeful groaned in himself, saying, oh, that I had kept on my way. Christian said, who could have thought that this path should have led us out of the way? Hopeful says, I was afraid from the very first, and therefore gave you that gentle caution. I would have spoke plainer, but that you are older than I am. Christian said, good brother, be offended. I am sorry. I have brought you out of the way, and that I put you into such imminent danger. I beg, my brother, forgive me, and I did not do it of an evil intent. Hopeful said, be comforted, my brother, for I forgive you, and believe too that this shall be for our good. Christian then said, I am glad I have with me a merciful brother, but we must not stand this way. Let us try to go back again. Hopeful said, be good, brother, let me go before. But good brother, let me go before. Let me lead out. No, said Christian, if you please, let me go first, that if there be any danger, I may be the first therein. Because by my means we are both gone out of the way. No, said Hopeful, you shall not go first, for your mind being troubled may lead you out of the way again. Then for their encouragement they heard the voice of one saying, let your heart be towards the highway, even the way that you went, and turned again. But by this time the waters were greatly risen, and by reason of which the way of going back was very dangerous. Then I thought that it is easier going out of the way when we were in than going on that we are out. Yet they had ventured to go back. But it was so dark, and the flood was so high. Then in their going back they had like to have been drowned 9 or 10 times. Neither could they, with all the skill they had, get again to the stile that night, or to the fence that night. Wherefore, at last, lighting under a little shelter, they sat down there till at daybreak. But being weary, they fell asleep. And now there was, not far from the place where they lay, a castle called Doubting Castle. Doubting Castle. The owner where was a giant Despair. And it was in his grounds they are now were sleeping, where he getting up in the morning early and waking and walking up and down in the fields, caught Christian and Hopeful asleep in his ground, and then with a grim and surly voice he bid them awake, and asked them from where they came from, and what they did in his grounds, and told them they were pilgrims, that they had lost their way. And then said the giant, you have this night trespassed on me by trampling in and lying on my ground, therefore you must go with me. So they were forced to go, because he was stronger than they were. They also had but little to say, for they knew themselves in fault. The giant therefore drove them before him, and put them in his castle into a very dark dungeon, nasty, stinking, in the spirit of these 2 men. Here then they lay, from Wednesday morning till Saturday night, without one bit of bread, one drop of drink, any light, or anyone to ask how they did. They were therefore here in evil ease, and were far from friends and acquaintances. Now in this place Christian had double sorrow, because it was through his unadvised haste that they were brought into this distress. Now Giant Despair had a wife, and her name was Diffidence. So when he was gone to bed, he told his wife what he had done, and that he had taken a couple of prisoners and cast them into his dungeon for trespassing on his grounds. Then he asked her also what he had best to do further to them. And she asked him what they were, from where they came and where they were going. And he told her. Then she counseled him that when he arose in the morning, he should beat them without any mercy. So when he arose, he found a grievous crabtree cudgel, and goes down into the dungeon to them. And there first falls to rating at them, as if they were dogs, although they gave him never a word of distaste. Then he falls upon them and beats them fearfully, in such sort that they were not able to help themselves, or to turn them upon the floor. This done, he withdrew, and leaves them there to condole their misery and to mourn under their distress. So all that day they spent the time in nothing but sighs and bitter lamentations. The next night, she taking with her husband about them further, talking with her husband about these prisoners further, and understanding that they were yet alive, did advise him to counsel them to make away themselves. So when morning was come, he went down to them in a surly manner, as before, And perceiving them to be very sore with the stripes that he had given them the day before, he told them that since they were never like to come out of that place, that the only way would be forthwith to make an end of themselves, either with knife or halter or poison. Knife, or by hanging, or by poison. For why, said he, should you choose life, seeing it is attended with so much bitterness? But they desired him to let them go. And with that he looked ugly upon them, and rushing at them, had doubtless made an end of them himself, but that he fell into one of his fits. For he sometimes in the sunshine weather fell into fits, and lost for a time the use of his hand. Wherefore he withdrew and left them as before to consider what to do. Then the prisoners consulted between themselves what was best to take his counsel or no, and thus they began this discourse. Christian said, what shall we do? The life that we now live in is miserable. For my part, I know whether it is best to live and thus or to die out of hand. My soul choose strangling rather than life. And the grave is more easy for me than this dungeon. Shall we be ruled by this giant? Hopeful said, indeed our present condition is dreadful, and death would be far more welcome to me than to spend the rest of my time here. But yet let us consider the Lord of the country to which we are going. He said, thou shalt not murder, nor not another man's person, much more than as we forbidden to take his counsel to kill ourselves. Besides, he that kills another cannot but commit murder upon his body. But for one to kill himself, it is to kill a body and soul at once. And moreover, my brother, you talk of ease in the grave, but have you forgotten the hell whither we are certain for murderers to go? For no murder has eternal life. And let us consider again that all the law is not in the hand of the giant Despair. Others, so far I can understand, have been taken by him, as well as we, and yet have escaped out of his hand. And who knows but that God may made the world, may cause that giant Despair may die, or that at some time or another he may forget to lock us in, or but he may in a short time have another of his fits before us, and may lose the use of his limbs. And if ever that should come to pass again, for my part, I am resolved to pluck up the heart of the man, and to try my utmost to get from under his hand. And I was a fool that I did not try to do it before. But however, my brother, let's be patient and endure for a while. The time we may come that we may give us a happy release. But let us not be our own murderers. With these words, Hopeful at present did moderate the mind of his brother. And they continued together in the dark that day, in their sad and doleful condition. Well, towards the evening, the giant goes down into the dungeon again to see all his prisoners had taken his counsel. But when he came there, he found them alive, and truly alive as was all. For now, for want of bread and water, and by reason of the wounds they received when he beat them, they could do little but breathe. But I say he found them alive. At which he fell into a grievous rage, and told them that seeing that they had disobeyed his counsel, it should be worse with them than if they had never been born. At this they trembled greatly, and I think the Christian fell into a swoon. That coming a little to himself again, they renewed their discourse about the giant's counsel, whether yet they had best talk it or no. Now Christian again seemed to be all for doing it, but Hopeful made his second reply as follows. My brother, said he, remember you not how valiant you have been here before. Apollyon could not crush you, nor could all that you did hear or see or feel in the valley of the shadow of the death. What hardships, terror, and amazement you have already gone through. And are you now nothing but fear? You see that I am in the dungeon with you, a far weaker man by nature than you are. Also this giant has wounded me as well, and as you, and has cut off the bread and water from my mouth, as with you. I mourn without delight, unless exercise a little more patience. Remember how you played the man at Vanity Fair, and was never afraid of the chain or the cage, nor yet bloody death. Wherefore let us, at least, to avoid the shame that becomes not a Christian to be found in, bear up with patience as well as we can. Now night had come upon them again, and the giant his wife being in bed, she asked him concerning the prisoners if they had taken his counsel. To which he replied, They are sturdy rogues. They choose rather to bear all the hardships than to make away with themselves. Then she said, Take them into the castle yard tomorrow, and show them the bones and skulls of those that you have already dispatched, and make them believe, before a week comes to an end, that you will also tear them in pieces, as you have done their fellows before them. When the morning was come, the giant goes to them again, and takes them into the castle yard, and shows them as his wife had bidden him. These, said he, the pilgrims as you are once, and they trespassed in my grounds as you have done. And when I thought fit, I tore them in pieces, so within 10 days I will do to you. Go, get down into your dungeon again. And with that he beat them to all the case and to all the way there. And they lay therefore all the day on Saturday in a lamentable case as before. Now when night was come, and when Mrs. Diffidence and her husband the giant were got to bed, they began to renew their conversation of the prisoners. And withal the old giant wondered that he neither by his blows nor counsel bring them to an end. And with this his wife replied, I fear, said she, that they live in hope, that some will come to relieve them, and that they have picklocks about them, by the means of which they hope to escape. And you said so, my dear, said the giant. I will therefore search them in the morning. Well, on Saturday about midnight they began to pray, and continued in prayer almost until breakday. Now a little bit before it was day, good Christian, as one half amazed, broke out of his passionate speech. What a fool, quoth he, I am thus to lie in the stinking dungeon, when I may as well walk at liberty. I have a key in my bosom called promise, and that will, I am persuaded, open the lock in any castle. So he said to Hopeful, That's good news, good brother. Pluck it out of your bosom and try. Then Christian pulled it out of his bosom and began to try at the dungeon door, whose bolt, as it turned, the key gave back. And the door flew open with ease, and Christian and Hopeful came out. And so he went to the outward door that leads into the castle's yard, and with his key opened all the doors thereof. After he went on from the iron gate, for that must be open too, but the lock went damnable hard. Yet the key did open it. And that they first opened the gate to make their escape with speed. But the gate, as it opened, made a great creaking, that it woke Giant Despair, who hastily rising to pursue his prisoners felt his limbs to fail. And as his fits took him again, so that he could by no means go after them. Then they went on and came to the king's highway again. So were safe because they were out of his jurisdiction. Now, when they were gone over to the defense, they began to contrive with themselves what they should do at the fence, to prevent those that should come over from falling into the hands of the giant Despair. So they consented to erect there a pillar, and engrave upon it the side thereof, over this fence is the way to the Doubting Castle, which is kept by Giant Despair, who despises the king of the celestial country and seeks to destroy his holy pilgrims. Many therefore have followed after, and read what is written, and escape the danger. This done, they sang as follows: Out of the way we went, and then we found what 'twas tread upon forbidden ground. And let them that come after us have a care, lest heedlessness makes them as we are to fare. Lest they for trespassing his prisoners are, whose castle doubting and whose name is despair. They went then till they came to the delectable mountains, which mountains belong to the Lord of the hill, of which he had spoken before. So they went up to the mountains, and behold, the gardens and orchards and vineyards and fountains of water, where they drank and washed themselves and did freely eat of the vineyard. Now there was on the top of the mountains shepherds feeding their flocks, and they stood by the highway side. And the pilgrims therefore went to them, and leaning upon their staves, as is common with very pilgrims, they had walking canes, walking sticks. They stand to talk any by the way. And they ask, whose delectable mountains are these, and whose be the sheep that feed upon them? The shepherd saith, the mountains are Emmanuel's land, and they are within the side of the city, and the sheep also are his, and he lay down his life for them. Christian answers, is this the way to the celestial city? The shepherd answered, you are just in your way. How far it is from here? Said Christian. Said shepherd, too far for any but those who shall get there indeed. Christian said, is this the way safe or dangerous? The shepherd said, safe for those for whom it is be safe, but transgressors shall fall therein. Transgressors shall fall therein. Christian answers, is there in this place any relief for pilgrims that are weary and faint in the way? The shepherd answered, the Lord of these mountains has given us charge not to be forgetful to entertain strangers. Therefore the good of the place is even before you. I saw also in my dream that when the shepherd perceived that they were wayfaring men, that they also put questions to them, to which they made them answer as in order as in other places, and from where they came from, and how they got into the way, and by what means have you preserved so far? For but few of them that began to come here do show their face on these mountains. But when the shepherds heard their answers, being pleased therewith, they looked very lovingly upon them and said, welcome to the delectable mountains. The shepherds say, whose names were knowledge, experience, watchful, and sincere, took them by the hand and had them in their tents, then made them partake of that which was already at present. They said, moreover, we would that you should stay here for a while and be acquainted with us, yet more to solace yourselves with the good of these delectable mountains. And they told them that they were content to stay, and so they went to their rest that night, and because it was very late. Then I saw in my dream that in the morning the shepherds called the Christian and hopeful to walk with them upon the mountains. So they went forth with them, and walked for a while, and having a pleasant prospect on every side, they said the shepherds one to another, shall we show these pilgrims some wonders? So when they had concluded to do it, they had them first to top of the hill called Error, which was very steep on the further side, and bid them look down to the bottom. And so Christian Hopeful looked down, and saw at the bottom several men dashed to pieces by the fall that they had from the top. So Christian asked, what does this mean? And the shepherds answers, have you not heard of them that were made to err by the hearkening of him, Hymenaeus and Philetus, as concerning the faith of the resurrection of the body? And they said, yes. And they said to the shepherds, those that you see lie dashed to pieces at the bottom of the mountains are they. And they have continued to this day, unburied, as you will see, for an example to others to heed, and how that they clamber too high, and how they come no near to the brink of the mountains. Then I saw that they had them to the top of another mountain, and the name of that mountain is Caution. And they said, Look far off. Which they did. They perceived, as they thought, several men walking up and down among the tombs, that they were there. And they perceived that these men were blind, because they stumbled sometimes upon the tombs, and because they had got out of the way from among them. And then said Christian, What does this mean? And the shepherds then answered, Did you not see a little below those mountains a gate, a fence, that led into a meadow on the side of the left hand of the way? And they said, Yes. Then said the shepherds, From that fence, that gate, there goes a path that leads directly to the doubting castle, which is kept by giant Despair. And these men, pointing to them among the tombs, came once on pilgrimage, as you do now, and even till they came to that same fence and that same gate. And because the right way was rough in that place, they chose to go out into the meadow. They were taken by giant Despair and cast to the doubting castle, where after they had been kept in the dungeon, he at last put out their eyes and led them among those tombs, where they were left to wander to this very day. That the saying of this wise man might be fulfilled, He that wandereth out of the way of understanding shall remain in the congregation of the dead. And that Christian and hopeful looked upon one another with tears gushing out, and said nothing to the shepherd. Oh, how they escaped the jaws of hell. Then I saw in my dream that the shepherds had them to another place in a bottom. There was a door in the side of the hill, and they opened the door and bid them look in. And they looked in, and they saw within it very dark and smoky, and also thought that they heard there a rumbling noise as of fire, and a cry of some tormented, and they smelt the scent of brimstone. Then said Christian, What means this? What does this mean? And the shepherds told them, saying that this is the byway to hell, a way that hypocrites go in at, namely such as sell their birthright with Esau, such as sell their master with Judas, such as blaspheme the gospel with Alexander, that lie and dissemble with Ananias and Sapphira his wife. And Hopeful said Hopeful to the shepherds, I perceived that these had on them every one a show of pilgrimage, as we have now, had they not? Yes, and held it in a long time too. Hopeful answers, How far might they go on a pilgrimage in their day, since they notwithstanding were this miserably cast away? Some further, and some not so far as these mountains, said the shepherd. Then said the pilgrims one to another, We need cry to be strong for strength. Yes, said the shepherd, you will have need to use it when you have it too. By this time the pilgrims had desired to go forwards, and the shepherds a desire that they should go, and so they walked towards the end of the mountains. And then said the shepherds one to another, Let us show the pilgrims the gates and the citadel city. If they have skill to look through our perspective glass. And the pilgrims then lovingly accepted the motion, so that they had them to the top of a high hill called Clear, and gave them their glass to look through. And they essayed to look, but the remembrance of the last thing that the shepherds had showed them made their hands shake, by means of which impediment they could not look steadily through the glass. Yet they thought they saw something like the gate, and also some of the glory of the place. And thus by the shepherds secrets are revealed, which from all men are kept concealed. Come to the shepherds then, if you will see things deep, things hid, the mysteries be. When they were about to depart, one of the shepherds gave them a note of the way. And another of them bid them beware of the flatterer. And the third bid them take heed that they sleep not upon the enchanted ground. And fourth, they bid them Godspeed. So I woke from my dream. And I slept and dreamed again and saw the same two pilgrims go down into the mountains along the highway towards the city, and a little below the mountains on the left hand lies the country of conceit. That which country, there comes into the way in which the pilgrims walk a little crooked lane, where therefore they met a very brisk lad that came out of the country, and his name was Ignorance. So Christian asked him from what parts that he had come from and where he was going. Ignorance said, Sir, I was born in the country that lies off there a little on the left, and I am going to the celestial city. Christian answered, But how do you think to get into the gate, for you may find some difficulty there? Ignorance says, As other good people have done, said he. But what have you to show at the gate, said Christian, that may cause the gatekeeper to open to you? Ignorance said, I know my Lord's will, and I have a good liver. I pay every man his own. I pray, I fast, I pay tithes, and give alms, and have left my country for where I am going. Christian answered, But when you come to the wicket gate, that is at the head of this way, you come in there through that same crooked lane. And therefore I fear, however you may think of yourself, when the reckoning day shall come, that you will have laid to your charge that you are a thief and a robber, instead of getting admittance into the city. Oh, Ignorance said, Gentlemen, you are utter strangers to me, and I know you not. Be content to follow the religion of your country, and I will follow the religion of mine. I hope it all, and it will be well. As for the gate that you talk of, and all the world knows that it is a great way off to our country, I cannot think that a man in all parts does so much as know the way to it. Nor need they matter whether they do or not, since we have, as you see, a fine, pleasant green lane that comes down from our country the next way into it. When Christian saw that the man was wise in his own conceit, and he said to Hopeful whisperingly, There's a more hopes of a fool than of him. And he said, moreover, When he that is a fool walks by the way, his wisdom fails him, and he says to everyone that he is a fool. What shall we walk further with him, or out, go, or get out of his way? So they left him, to think of what he had heard already, and to stop again for him afterwards, and to see if by degrees we can do any good to him. Let ignorance in a little while now muse on what is said, and let him not refuse good counsel to embrace, unless he remain still ignorant of what's the chiefest gain. God said, Those that no understanding have, although he made them he will not save. Hopeful answered. He further added, It is not good, I think, to say to all to him at once, Let us pass him by, and if you will, talk to him again, even as he is able to bear it. So they both went on, and Ignorance came after them. Now when they had passed him a little way, they entered into a very dark lane, where they met a man whom 7 devils had bound with 7 strong cords, and were carrying of him back to the door that Saul in the side of the hill. Now good Christian began to tremble. So did Hopeful as his companion. Yet as the devils led away the man, Christian looked to see if he knew him, and he thought he might be one turnaway that dwelt in town of apostasy. But he did not perfectly see his face, and he did not hang his head like a thief that is found. But being gone past, Hopeful looked at him again, and looked back his back as a paper with his inscription, Wanton Professor and Damnable Apostate. Wanton Professor and Damnable Apostate. And then Christian said to his fellow, Now I call to remembrance that which was told me of the thing that happened to a good man hereabout. The name of the man was Little Faith, but a good man, and he dwelt in the town of Sincere. And the thing was this, at the entering in of his passage there comes down from Broadway Gate a lane called Dead Man's Lane, so called because of the murders that are commonly done there. And this Little Faith, going on pilgrimage, as we do now, chanced to sit down there and slept. And now there happened at that time to come down that lane from the Broadway Gate 3 sturdy rogues, outlaws. And their names were Faint-Hearted, Mistrust, and Guilt. 3 brothers. And they looked at Little Faith, where he was, and came galloping up with speed. Now the good man was just awake from his sleep, and was getting up to go his journey. So they came all the way up to him, and with threatening language bid him stand. As this Little Faith looked, as white as a clot, and had neither power nor fight nor fly. They said, Faint-Hearted, deliver your purse. But he, making no haste to do it, for he was lost to lose his money. Mistrust ran up to him, and thrusting his hand into his pocket, pulled out from there a big bag of silver. And then he cried out, Thieves! Thieves! With that Guilt, with a great club that was in his hand, struck Little Faith on the head, and with that blow felled him flat on the ground, where he lay bleeding as one that would bleed to death. All this while the thieves stood by, but at last they, hearing some were upon the road, fearing lest it should be a great grace that dwells in the city of good confidence, they decided to take to their heels, and left this good man to shift for himself. Now after a little while, Little Faith came to himself, and getting up, made way to Scrabble on his way. And this was the story. Hopeful said, But did they take from him all that he ever had? No, said Christian. The place where his jewels were, they never ransacked. So those he kept still. But as I was told, the man was much afflicted for his loss. For the thieves got most of the spending money. That which they got, not, as I said, were jewels, as he had a little odd money left, but scarce enough to bring him to his journey's end. No, if I was not so misinformed, he was forced to beg as he went, to keep himself alive. For his jewels he might not sell, but beg and do what he would. He went, as we say, with many a hungry belly, yet most of the rest of the way. Hopeful answered, But is it not a wonder that they got not from him his certificate, by which he was received his admittance into the celestial gate? Christian said, It's a wonder, but they got it not. Though they must not, through any cunning of his, for being dismayed with their coming upon him, had neither power nor skill to hide anything, so 'twas more good providence by his endeavor that they missed that good thing. Hopeful said, But it was needs be comfort him that they got not his jewel from him. Christian answered, it might have been great comfort to him had he used it as he should. But they told me the story and said that he made but little use of it the rest of the way. That because of the dismay that he had in their taking away his money, indeed he forgot a great part of the rest of the journey, and besides, when at a time it came into his hand, he began to be comforted therewith, would fresh thoughts of his loss come again upon him, and those thoughts would swallow him up. Oh, Hopeful said, alas, poor fellow, poor man, this could not be but a grief to him. Christian said, grief? Oh, yes, a grief indeed. Would it not have been so to any of us, had we been used to as he, to be robbed and wounded too, and that in a strange place as he was? 'Tis a wonder that he did not die with a grief, poor heart. I was told that he scattered almost all the rest of the way with nothing but doleful and bitter complaints, telling also to all that overtook him that he was overtaken in the way as he went, where he was robbed, and how he was taken, and what they did to him, and what he lost, and how he was wounded, and that he had hardly escaped with life. Hopeful answered, but it is a wonder that his necessities did not put him upon selling or pawning some of his jewels, that he might have something to relieve himself on the journey. You talk like once upon whose head is a shell in this very way, in this very day. For what should we pawn then, or to whom should we sell them? In all the country where he was robbed, his jewels were not accounted for, nor did he want the relief that he could have from them administered to him. Besides his jewels being missing at the gate of the celestial city, he had, and that he knew very well enough, been excluded from an inheritance there. That he would have been worse to him than the appearance of a villainy 10,000 thieves. Hopeful said, why are you so tart, my brother? Esau sold his birthright, and that for a mess of pottage. And that birthright was his greatest jewel. And if he might, why might not little faith do the same thing too? Esau did sell his birthright, right indeed, so do many besides. And so by doing so exclude themselves from the chief blessing also of that caitiff did. But you must put a difference between Esau and little faith, as also between their estates. Esau's birthright was typical, but little faith's jewels were not so. Esau's belly was his appetite, and little faith did not so. Besides, Esau could see no further than the fulfilling of his lust. For I am at the point to die, and so he said, what good will it be if my birthright now? But little faith, through such extravagance, made to see the price of his jewels more than to sell them, as Esau does his birthright. You read not anywhere that Esau had faith, nor not so much as a little. Therefore, no marvel, do not marvel, if where the flesh only bears sway as it will in the man where no faith is to resist, if he sells his birthright and his souls and all that to the devil of hell. For it is with such as with the ass, the donkey, who in their occasions cannot be turned away. When their minds are set upon their lusts, they will have them whatever they cost. But little faith was another temper. His mind was on things divine. His livelihood was upon things that were spiritual and from above. Therefore, to what end should he that is of such temper sell his jewels? He had there been any that would have bought them, and to fill his mind with empty things. Will a man give a penny to fill his belly with hay? Or can that persuade you, that turtle dove, to live upon carrion, like the crow? Though faithless ones can for carnal lust pawn, or mortgage or sell what they have, and themselves outright to boot, yet they that have faith saving faith, though but a little of it, cannot do so. Here, therefore, my brother, is your mistake. I acknowledge it, says a hopeful, but yet your severe reflection had almost made me angry. Christian answers, why I did but compare you to some of the birds that are of the brisker sort, who will run to and fro and trodden past with a shell upon their heads. But pass by that, and consider the matter under debate, that all shall be well between you and me. Hopeful said, but Christian, these three fellows, I am persuaded in my heart, are but a company of cowards. Would they have to run else, think you, as they did at the noise of one that was coming on the road? And why did not little faith pluck up and a greater heart, that he might have stood one brush with them, and have yielded when there was no remedy? Christian answered, they are but cowards. Many have said, but few have found it in the time of trial. For as for a great heart little faith had done, I perceive by you, my brother, had you been the man of concern, you are but for a brush, and then to yield. And verily, truly, since this is the height of your stomach, now they are at a distance from us, and should they appear to you, as they did to him, they might put you to a second thought. But consider again, they are journeyman thieves. They serve under the king of the bottomless pit, who, if need be, will come in their aid, and at his voice, as in the roaring of a lion, I myself have been engaged, as the little faith was, and I found a terrible thing. These three villains set upon me, and I, beginning like a Christian to resist, they gave but a call in the name of their master, and I would, as the saying is, have given my life for a penny. But that is God would have it, I was clothed in armor of proof. Yes, and yet, though I was harnessed, I was clothed, I found it hard work to quit myself like a man. No man can tell what that combat attends us, but he that in the battle himself. Hopeful said, well, but they ran, you see, when they did not suppose that one great grace was in the way. Christian said, true, they have often fled, but they and their master, when great grace has been appeared. And no marvel, for he is the king's champion. But I trow you will but some difference between little faith and the king's champion. And all the king's subjects are not his champions, nor can they, when tried, do such feats as war as he. It is worthy to think that a little child should handle Goliath as David did, or that there should be strength of an ox in a ren. Some are strong, and some are weak, and some are great faith, and some have little. This man was one of the weak, and therefore he went to the walls. Hopeful said, I would that it had been great grace for their sakes. Christian said, if it had been he might have had his hands full. For I must tell you that though great grace is excellent good at his weapons, and has and can, long as he keeps them at sword's point, do well enough with them, yet if they get within him faint heart and mistrust, and the other, it shall go hard, but they will throw up their hands. And when a man is down, you know what he can do. Whosoever look well upon great grace's face shall see those scars and cuts there. That shall easily give demonstrations of what I say. Yes, once I heard he should say, and that he was in the country, in combat. We despaired even unto life. How did these sturdy rogues and their fellows make David groan and moan and roar? Yes, Heman and Zechariah and Hezekiah too, though champions in their way, were forced to bestir them when they were assaulted. And yet, notwithstanding, they had their coats soundly brushed by them. Peter upon a time would go and try what he could do. But though some have to say that of him that he is the Prince of Apostles, they handled him as so that they made him at last afraid of a sorry girl. That's where we're going to stop for right now. On page 148 at the first paragraph. Boy, this has fit our lives, doesn't it? The things we hold on to so much, that mean so much to us, that get in the way of the kingdom of God. The jewels, the silver, the gold. Father, I send this message out again to Christians that will make them more sturdy, that can give us stronger hearts and give us more a firmer stand upon this wicked earth, upon this terrestrial place of deceit and despair. Father, thank you for these words that were encouraging to us from so many years ago. In Jesus' name, I pray, encourage the hearts of those that are listening, for your honor, for your glory, and forgive me where I failed you. In Jesus' name, amen.